So now we will look at the Magad Empire. Okay. So now Magad is basically a place, okay, and in Magad you will find that there were a lot of dynasties that came and then went through. It all started with Haryanka dynasty, okay, wherein we had Ajatashatru and we had Bimbisar, okay, and then it went to Sheshungas, then came the Nandis, and finally came the Mauryas, okay. So after Mauryas, then you will find that there is a succession that has started. So what happens generally is that we study after Mauryas, because we study that how Mauryas came, then the empire actually declined. Then there was a certain period where there was no major, you can say, a great power like Maurya that came, because there was Tungas and there was Kanvas, but there was no major power. In that time only you will find that there are like invasions happening from the outside of India. For example, there are Indo-Greek, then there is Sakas, then there are Parthians that are coming. Basically you will find that are coming in India, okay, and invading India. And now what you will find, yes, so now you will find that after that, then Mauryas got the greatest empire, like after this gap of around 250-300 years, you have basically an empire called Gupta, which again takes like the entire India within itself. And then after Gupta, we have Harsha. So this is where Harshvardhan is the last king or ruler that we will read about in the ancient history, because that's when we will end it. Okay, and from there on, then we will move to the medieval history. Okay, so let's take like one by one what was there in each of these dynasties and what was so famous about them. Okay. So we will start with, so already studying this Vedic period, now we will see that here you have written 642 to 410, and this is all in BC, and this is where basically Saisunga dynasty of Magad is coming. So before Saisunga, you should know that Saisunga dynasty, there are 2-3 rulers that you need to remember from exam point of view from each of these dynasties that started ruling in Magad. Okay, in Magad you will find that the capital was basically has been shifted, like it be Rajgriha also, there will be Patliputra also, okay, the Vaishali will also be the capital. So as and when the different rulers are coming, the capital is also changing. Okay, with Haryanka dynasty you will find that it started with Bimbisar, okay, he was the first great ruler, and then after Bimbisar came the Ajatashatru, and Ajatashatru you will find was the one where one Buddhist council was also held, okay, and he was in close contact with Lord Buddha. And then after Haryanka dynasty, basically came the Saisungas. In Saisunga, you had a ruler called Kalashok. Okay, in that Kalashok's time, you will find that there was a second Buddhist council that was held. Okay, then came the Nandis, in Nandas basically, and then you will find here Dhananda, Mahapadmananda. Okay, people like great rulers basically in the Nanda Empire. And then after Nandas, basically after defeating them, and how they got defeated, because of the Chandragupta Maurya, he took the help of Kautilya. Okay, he took the help of Kautilya, and finally he defeated the last ruler of Nandas, which was Dhananda. Okay, and then he established the empire. And in Mauryan's court only, or Chandragupta's court only, you will find basically Megasthenes. Okay, and Megasthenes wrote the book called Indica. So these are like few points that I'm giving you that you should remember. So the Saisunga dynasty that we're talking about is the second dynasty, which was basically part of the Magad area, and it ruled that Magad area for quite a while. Then after basically Magad Empire, I told you that around 600 or 563 BC, you will also find, so see, what is happening is 640 to 410, that means 500 is coming in between. So that is why I'm telling you that 563 BC, where Gautam Buddha was there, he was born. And so with respect to Gautam Buddha, remember like 5-6 places which are very important, okay, and this is how you can say a structure of stupa is also built. Okay, so if you see a stupa, how is a stupa? There is Anda, okay, then there is Harmika, then there is Chhatri, Chatris are there, okay, then there is Medhi, there is Vedika, and then there are Torans, and then there is a Pradakshina Path. Okay, so if you find the Pradakshina Path or these gateways, like there are 4 Torans, right, back, front, so you will find that these represent the places with respect to the Lord Buddha. Okay, so you will find that Lumbini is where Buddha was born, and it is in Nepal. Okay, then you go towards, then after Lumbini, he went to basically, he left his house, he left the place. So when Buddha is born, it is denoted by a lotus. Okay, and when he left the palace, it is called as the Mahabhinish Karma. Okay, Mahabhinish Karma, which is denoted by the wheel. which is denoted by the horse. Okay, that means he's leaving his palace in a chariot, and that is why it is represented by a horse. Then he went to the Bodhi tree. Okay, achieved enlightenment or nirvana, and that this is the place where he achieved nirvana, and this is in Gaya, Bihar. After achieving nirvana, he basically gave his first sermon in Sarnath, UP. Okay, and this is what we called as the Pravartan. Okay, Mahachakra Pravartan. Okay, and here we are represented by wheel. Basically, what is happening? The wheel is turning, because here the Buddha has started enlightening people. He has started giving sermons to people to achieve so that they can achieve nirvana too. Okay, so that is why it is called as the Mahachakra Parivartan. And then from here, finally, he will die in Kushinagra, and that is where we call as the Mahaparinirvana. Okay, that means like his soul met with the highest soul. So this is how these places are arranged, and this is how these four what you can call as the four places like Lumbini, Gaya, Sarnath, and this Kushinagra, they are all actually presented in the form of four gateways present in the stupa. Okay, so everything that is present that you're learning needs to be connected with other points so that you remember it for a longer period of time. Okay, so Gautam Buddha, you can see it falls somewhere in between, and that is why I was telling you that in Haryanika dynasty only, the Ajatasattu was the one where the first Buddhist council took place. So this Gautam Buddha was born at Lumbini. He attained enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. Okay, and then 544 we finally find there is a accession of Bimbisara. Then, so Sunga dynasty is like this all is happening in between. Okay, and then 540 to 467 you will find birth of Varadman, who is basically better known as Mahavira, and who is the 23rd Tirthankar of 23rd or 24th. Which Tirthankar is he? Okay, so that you need to tell me in the comment box. Okay, so you will find out that now is the birth of Jainism. Okay, with respect to Jainism also, you will find that there are three jewels. Okay, right knowledge, right conduct, and right faith that you need to know. And in Jainism, you also need to know that they propose like five things five sort of ideals that you should follow. For example, you should never steal. You should always, you should never be violent, or you should be, ahimsa is what they call it. Then you should always speak truth. That is what they call as satya. Then you should not be craving for these materialistic possessions, and that is why. And basically you should be living a very simple monastic life. And then fifth is basically staying brahmachari or like a celibate for your entire life. So these are like the five things or a code of conduct that you can follow as a Jainism. So you will find that finally in 540 you have birth of Varadman, of his known better as Mahavira, and he's born in Vaishali, okay, which is basically Kudagram. Then in 518 you will find, so there is Darius, there is Darius, there is Xerxes, and there is Darius. Okay, these are like three people, okay, from Persia, or autocrats of Persia, who will try coming to India. So Darius, the autocrat of Persia, he sends Skylax on a naval expedition and down to the Indus to find a way from Persia through Indus. Okay, and then Persian conquest of Indus Valley finally takes place here, and you will find that India develops a contact with the Persian world, and that is why you will find that in Ashoka, when Ashoka became the emperor, he used to have he used to follow a different script in India, while for the northwestern parts like Afghanistan and beyond, he used to have Kharoshti script. Okay, that Kharoshti script actually came via this Persian invasion. Because see what is happening. See, this is like in India or Indian subcontinent, and this is like another civilization. And these two civilizations, if they're exchanging something, then only you can actually come across their culture. So when Persia invaded India, or when they came in contact with India, that is only when their culture flowed into India. Like we started discovering their script, okay, we started discovering what they are doing, and that is when you will realize that Ashoka actually got the concept of these pillars. You remember the pillars, like the stone pillars that Ashoka used to have, like from the one at Sarnath, we have our emblem, national emblem of the country. But these stone pillars are actually said to be like a different version of Archimedean pillars, which are found in the Persian Empire only. Okay, and these pillars, you will find that they have a lot of similarity of what is found there. So that is why I'm saying that it is through invasion only that we actually came in the contact of this Persian world, and there was like a new channel now created. Okay. Then in 494, accession of Ajatasattu, son of Bimbisara, Magad, who was a Magad king. Okay, that time. And then in 362, I told you Nanda dynasty of Magad will come in. And then finally what happens, it is here only that we will find that Alexander the Great. Okay, Alexander the Great, he actually invades India. Okay, and here is the battle of Hidaspes. Okay, so here is the Battle of Hidaspes that is fought, and you will find that Alexander actually enters India. There's a very famous story where basically it is a battle fought at Jhelum, and so he is entering India. Okay, he reaches Indus, and there the king who was present at that particular area, like the Indus area, he basically greeted. Alexander, etc. But then Alexander obviously wanted to conquer India, and that is why he came, like he moved forward. He went till Jhelum, and at Jhelum, you will realize there was a battle fought, like a fierce battle fought. But he was so happy with the opposition side that he decided to reinstate the ruler, like not to acquire the territory, although he won, but he actually gave his territory, like he acquired the territory in the under him, but he reinstated the earlier ruler back to his throne. Okay, that is what I'm saying. Your valor, your courage can never die, even if you are in the opposite side. But if you're so strong, so valorous, so courageous, that other person, like the opposite side, falls in love with you, then obviously they will give your kingdom back to you. Okay, and then Alexander wanted to move forward, but his army, like the army that he got, was getting tired. They were like getting restless, and so much of heat also, so much change in climate also, that they all wanted to go back. And that is why Alexander decided to not go for further acquisition or further battles in India, and he left India, and he was going back to his place in like to Greece, and in the middle only he died, like through in the journey. So this is like a very short, crisp story of Alexander. I've not named the places, I've not named certain battles, etc., that were also fought, because that you need to read. This is like a wall chart. Okay, so this is when Alexander invades India. This is not in case, this is invades India. Okay, and then on June 323, I told you that a death of Alexander at Babylon, which is a place through which you have to cross if you are crossing from India to Greece. Okay, so this is at Babylon, is a place where Alexander actually dies. So this was like a brief history. Now we go to the 322. So this is what is the year I call it as a important landmark in the history of India, because from here you need to remember everything. Okay, because this is like a start of the Mauryan dynasty, the great empire. Okay, and in India it is said that there are three. There are like two rulers, if you have to say that, who are like the emperors, like the true emperors. One is the Ashoka. Okay, who was able to like almost get entire India under him, and the second would be Akbar. Okay, so Akbar was the second greatest emperor, and then it is said that only it is under the Britishers, then you will find that the maximum of India coming under one rule. Okay, so two emperors which had like a maximum of India coming under their rule was Ashoka and then Akbar. So we come to the Mauryan dynasty. So 322 BC, you will find that here the first, so in Mauryas also there are many rulers. Okay, the first great ruler is Chandragupta Maurya. Okay, who basically with the help of Kautilya, okay, whom we also called as the Vishnugupt, who we also call as Chanakya. Okay, and so he with the help of Chanakya, Vishnugupta or Kautilya gets this Mauryan dynasty or this Magad empire back. And then after Chandragupta Maurya, you will find his son Bindusar. Okay, and after Bindusar, you will find Ashoka. So this is the chronology of the Mauryan Empire. Okay, so these are the great rulers I'm telling. After Ashoka, you will find many rulers have come till the last one. When after Mauryan dynasty, after Mauryas, you will find finally Shungas coming into picture. Okay, but I'm telling you the three great rulers of this Mauryan dynasty. So now at 322 BC, you will find that Chandragupta Maurya has took over the reign of the Mauryan Empire. Okay, he has become the founder of Mauryan dynasty. Okay, don't get this Chandragupta Maurya confused with the Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty. Okay, in Gupta dynasty you have two Chandragupta, Chandragupta 1 and Chandragupta 2. Okay, and in between them you have what? You have one more Gupta. Okay, so there is Chandragupta, there is one more ruler in Samudragupta, and then you have Chandragupta 2, who has another name also. So now don't get confused with those, because those are in the Gupta dynasty. What we are discussing here is the Mauryan dynasty. Okay, so 322 BC is basically where the reign of Chandragupta Maurya started. He was the one who put the neve, we can say, the foundation of the Mauryan dynasty. Okay, so you will find that Chandragupta Maurya was very courageous, very valorous, and in his court there was presence of Megasthenes. Okay, who was what? Who was the ambassador of the? Who was ambassador sent from Seleucus? He was the ambassador of the king Seleucus. Okay, he came to the court of Mauryas, and then he stayed here. He wrote a book also, Indica, which gives a very vivid description of how the Mauryan Empire was, what was its polity, what was their administration. I think there were like 6 to 7 books, out of which only few books could be preserved. Okay, And even Kautilya, like the Vishnugupta, the Chanakya, he also wrote like 3 books on administration and how the king was, how his personal life was, and 1 book about the administration, how he used to conduct the administrative affairs, how basically king was there, but king used to rule according to a assembly, or the what you can call as a group of prominent people, in which one was a priest, other one was the senapati, and then other one would be the head of the spies, etc. So there was a council of ministers who used to guide this like king. Okay, and then he also tells about the foreign affairs of the Mauryan Empire, and then he also discusses how law and justice used to prevail, how in Mauryan Empire you had a very strict punishment for people like who used to steal, who used to who used to lie, etc. And there was like very strict, even like punishments like taking away your finger, etc. is also like very crude punishments are also mentioned here. And here only you will find that he has mentioned like there are instances of telling how in Mauryan Empire there was a classification in society, how agriculture was, or land revenue was the main source of income. Okay, and how Mauryans also had contacts with the outer world, and there was a strong presence of spies in the entire system. So like that they have described, like through Kautilya's books also, through various inscriptions also, through writings of Megasthenes also, we have inferred how the Mauryan Empire might have been. Okay. Then after Chandragupta Maurya, we have basically reign of Bindusar, okay, who was the son of Chandragupta Maurya. Okay. After the Chandragupta Maurya son Bindusar's reign get over, we have a reign of Ashoka, whom we call as the greatest emperor. Okay, Ashoka's other name was Priyadarshini, which was found on a pillar. Okay, and through which basically it was inferred that this Priyadarshini meant for Ashoka only. Okay, Ashoka is a very widely known figure, and it is Ashoka who basically can be said as the like what we call as the like he basically converted himself to Buddhism after the battle of Kalinga, wherein he saw so much of blood flowing, and he decided that he will never go to war. If he has to win any country, it will be via his ideals, it will be via basically, it will be a religious pursuit, but never be a spiritual pursuit, not religious pursuit, but basically it will never be via battle. And that is why after that you will find that Ashoka, it is also called as if he basically was the one who went on the path of Dhamma. Okay, so Dharma, Dhamma. So you will find that in Buddhism they mentioned about the path of Dhamma. Okay, and that Dharma, basically that Buddhism is talking about, is about living a monastic life, going and living in monasteries. But Ashoka, and for him, Dharma meant a way of life. It was a way of living, wherein he said you should respect your elders, you should be basically thoughtful towards the priest and the people who are actually living on alms. You should never hurt any animal. There should be no animal sacrifices. So like that, you should never portray your strongness towards a weak person. So like that, he gave certain sermons, and he actually got them inscripted. Okay, on the stone pillars, on these slabs, on the stones also. And that is why we find that today also we have and he constructed like 84,000 stupas, okay, like which was like the highest in the history, and to propagate Buddhism. He also sent his son, okay, and daughter to Sri Lanka to propagate Buddhism. Okay, in the south, in the east, he used to send his ambassadors all over the world to ensure that Buddhism's ideals, the Buddhism as a religion, Buddhism's the values, these are spreading across the world, because he wanted peace, he wanted like spirituality, he wanted people to be more accepting, more basically living in a society which is connected by a bond. Okay, so this was like a brief about Ashoka. And then obviously the reign of Ashoka started, and there was a Kalinga war, and after that you will find that once Ashoka's reign is getting over, you will find that the last Mauryan king, the Brihadrath, he was assassinated by his general, like the general in the army, who was the Pushyamitra Sunga. And that is where the Ashokan or the Mauryan dynasty gets over, and then you have basically Sunga dynasty coming in picture. So remember the order in the Magad Empire, it was Haranyaka, then it was Saisungas, then it was Nandas, then it was Mauryas, and finally there would be Sungas. Okay, Sunga dynasty started with Pushyamitra Sunga, and then you will realize that after him, his son was Agnimitra Sunga. Okay, so Pushyamitra Sunga can be called as the contemporary to the person whom we basically sell as the Pitama of Yoga. Who was the Pitama of Yoga, or who gave this, who was the founder of this yogic philosophy? You need to tell me in the comment box, because that person was actually contemporary to Pushyamitra Sunga. Okay, so Pushyamitra Sunga, he is the founder of the Sunga dynasty, and during this time only you will find, since the India is now getting into different empires, like smaller empires, here basically the chances of invading India increases, and this is where you will find that the foreign invasions in India have started. So here you will find that Bactrians, the Greek Bactrians, have started invading India, And after Pushyamitra Sunga, you have Agnimitra Sunga. So Pushyamitra Sunga is said to have destroyed the Sanchi stupa, while Agnimitra Sunga has said to have like re-established it or refurbished this particular stupa. And in this Pushyamitra Sunga was basically you can say he was ardent Hinduism. He again conducted Ashwamedha and all these the like a very ritual forms of Hinduism. And he actually is said to be non-tolerant ruler towards Buddhism, and he wanted to actually like expand the reach of Hinduism. Okay, so and then after that, after him came his son Agnimitra Sunga, and if you remember the Kalidas's play on Malvika Agnimitra. Okay, so then Agnimitra is basically the Agnimitra Sunga, who is the son of Pushyamitra Sunga. Okay, now who's the last Sunga ruler? So last Sunga ruler is Devabhuti, who was assassinated, and who was again assassinated, and then the Kanvas rule started. So you have Haranaka, you have Sesungas, you have what? You have Nandas, you have Mauryas, then you have Sungas, and then finally you have Kanvas. Okay, so Kanvas are this last dynasty, last major dynasty you can say. Okay, in the Magad Empire. So Kanvas, the founder of this dynasty was Vasudev Kanva. Okay, and he was also an ardent Hinduism follower, and he also wanted to spread Hinduism. Okay, so not much is available about the Kanvas, only like very little information is there. And then you will find basically this 58 BC, which is basically the start of the Vikram Samvat. Okay, and it was introduced by the king Vikramaditya of Ujjain. And here you will find that there is an invasion by the Saka rulers also in the northwestern part of India. So you will find that, see, whatever is happening is actually in India. If you see the map also, so there is southern India and then there is a northern India. So in southern India, since there was an ocean, okay, and not every power can be a very good like marine power, because you need special kind of ships, you need different kind of armors. So you will find that most of the invasions in India, they are, see, here too you have protection of Himalayas. So here invasions are not happening. Here you have protection of seas. So the only place available for your invasion is basically this northwestern region. So you will find Bactrians also coming from here, Indo-Greeks coming from here, Persians coming from here. Then you have Sakas coming from here, Parthians coming from here. So everybody who is entering India is entering from the northwest. Even the Mughal emperors that enter, they enter from the northwest. Okay. So you will find then after 50 BC to 225 AD, there is basically, so I told you, right? So the last dynasty, like Mauryan, after Mauryan dynasty, you know what I'll do? I'll just like give you a sequence till now. So what we have done, we have learnt about the prehistoric time, which was Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic. After that, we went to the proto-history, wherein we discussed about the Indus Valley civilization. Okay. Then came the Vedic age, which is also called as the Iron Age. And this was called as the Chalcolithic age. Okay, and then in Iron Age you had the Rig Vedic period, then you had the later Vedic period. Okay, and here only we had something called as Smritis and Shrutis, etc. Okay, and here only you will find it Upanishads, Aranyakas, and then you know like other books also, like the epics also getting written, etc. Then after Vedic period, you had basically the rise of Mahajanpadas. Okay, out of which one Mahajanpada that we read was Magad. In Magad, you had certain dynasties coming. There was Haryana dynasty, Sesunga dynasty. Then you had Nandas, then you had Mauryas, then you had Sungas, and then you had Kanvas. Okay, in this time period only, you have basically religions rising like Buddhism, Jainism, and Zoroastrianism. And during, like after Mauryas, you will realize that this is a time from Sungas to Kanvas. This is the time we have foreign invasion. So you have Bactrians, you have Sakas, you have Indo-Greeks, and you have Parthians coming into picture. Okay, now after this, the next dynasty that we will study is Gupta dynasty, but that will only start around 200 AD. Okay, but this is getting ended around, you can call it as like Kanvas will be ruling there till 70 BC. That means there is a good gap of around 200-300 years. Okay, and in this 200-300 years, you will find that here there are no major dynasties that are happening, and that is why this period can also be called as a black period of history. Okay, because of Indian history, because there is no major like happening that we have of this period. And after that, you will find that one dynasty that we read is basically this Andhra Bhoj, or which we call as a Satvahan dynasty. Okay, so Satvahanas, so Gautami Putra Satkarni. So these are the names that you might have heard, like Hala. So these are all the rulers of the Satvahan dynasty. Satvahan dynasty, they were also called as the Andhra Bhoj. So they were basically the Andhra dynasty. And the Satvahan dynasty, you will find that they were the language that they mostly popularized was Prakrit. Okay, they used to write their inscriptions in Prakrit. And then in the Satvahana dynasty, you have basically Gautami Putra Satkarni, who was a very famous ruler, and they this Gautami Satvahans were called as the promoter of what you call as a Brahmanism. Okay, they wanted to protect this Brahmanic culture, and here you will find extensive use of lead. So they used to have lead coins also. There was a presence of ships on those lead coins, so that is why they infer that they knew how to basically navigate the oceans, etc. And here we will find a lot of inscriptions also in different areas. Okay, written in Prakrit, and yeah, majorly this. And then in Satavahan period also you will find the stupas getting like built. Okay, for example, the Amravati stupa, etc. And then Satvans only you will find that they were also the ones who actually made Ajanta paintings. Okay, so during this reign only Ajanta paintings were also there. So this is like the part of art and culture, but that I'm trying to bring it into here so that you understand how things are getting. So the Satvans were the one where you will find that a lot of stupas are getting constructed. For example, Amravati stupa and all. And this is a period where you will find that Ajanta paintings have also come in the picture. Okay, so after Satvahans, you will find that this guy, this Gautamiputra Satkarni, is one of the rulers of the Satvahan dynasty only. Okay, and then after Satvahans, what you will find is around 100 AD or something, you have basically rulers of Kushana rule coming. And Kushans are very, very famous for something called as their art and craft, for something called as their sculptures. Okay, and this is where you will find this Kushan dynasty is also considered as the postmodern period in art and culture. And this is where you will find that the sculpture making is at its peak. Okay, because you have a Gandhara, you have Mathura art, which is basically patronized by these Kushan rulers. And amongst Kushan also you will find one ruler who's very powerful, who's very famous, is this Kanishka. Okay, so this Kanishka, finally what is happening around 120 AD is that Kanishka is getting to the throne, and he is a great Kushan. Okay, after Kanishka, okay, so in Kushan rules you need to remember that who were Kushanas. So Kushanas were basically the people who used to control the trade route. So if you so remember the ancient Silk route. Yes, it is a route that China is trying to rebuild today in the form of OBOR. Okay, One Belt, One Road Initiative or Belt and Road Initiative. So this road, this One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road Initiative is basically nothing but China's modern, you can say the modern way of reviving its old ancient Silk Route that used to run from China, and then it used to go via land routes and sea routes to Europe and other African nations, etc. So this Silk Route, in the northwestern region of India was controlled by the rulers called as Kushanas. And out of these Kushanas only, you will find that Kushanas actually were the one who first introduced something called as a pure gold coins in India. Okay, and then they used to have pictography on these gold coin also. Like they used to have their ruler also. Then you will find the presence of different gods also, okay, mentioned on these like made on these gold coins. Okay, so these Kushans were famous for their gold coins, and the next thing that they were famous for was basically the sculpture making. So you will find that they were the patronizers of Buddhism, and you will find that Buddhist sculpture making was at its peak. So you have a Gandhara art and you have a Mathura art, which is coming under them. And the third form of art, which is basically the Vengi style, or what we call as basically the Amravati style of sculpture making, that is under the patronage of Satvahans. Okay, so that is different. But these two, what we call as the Gandhara art and the Mathura, are patronized by the Kushans. So in Mathura sculpture making, you already know that there was basically Hinduism also, Buddhism also, Jainism also. But Gandhara art was majorly about Buddhism. Okay. And there was a use of blue schist, there was a use of blue schist sandstone, and then in the Mathura art you had basically red and white spotted sandstone, and there were like differences that you must have read in art and culture. So what we do in art and culture is basically we write here Gandhara art, we write Mathura, and then we write Amravati. First we write the area, so you will find that Gandhara was in the northwest around Taxila, Mathura was obviously near around Mathura, and this Amravati was around Amravati. Okay, the rivers like the Krishna Tungabhadra basin is where Amravati is present. Okay, then you find the rulers. So these two are Kushanas, and these two are Amravati is under Satvahans. Okay, this is only for Buddhism. This is Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, and this is basically Buddhism only. Okay, here you will find you have a Buddha as a sculpture. Okay, so see, earlier what was happening is Kushans were the one who became the followers of Mahayana kind of Buddhism. Okay, so in Buddhism also there are different sects. There is a Hinayana, okay, Theravada Buddhism, like a Hinayana Buddhism. Then there is Mahayana Buddhism. There is Tantric Buddhism. So in Hinayana Buddhism is basically Buddha is not represented in the form of man. So if you have to represent Buddha, you will represent by symbols like lotus, elephant, empty throne, or wheel, or horse, etc. But you will not make Buddha as a man. Like you will not give him a what you call as the like humanistic appearance. But in the Mahayana Buddhism is what is happening. Buddha has taken a human form, and there is like proper worshipping happening. There are rituals being followed. So whatever like the starting of Buddhism was sort of basically you can say there is a huge deviation in this Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, so in Mahayana Buddhism you will find and this Kushanas, especially the Kanishka, he was a follower of the Mahayana Buddhism, and in his reign only there was a fourth Buddhist council that was held. Okay. So because Ashoka was the one where third Buddhist council was held, and our Kanishka was the one where fourth Buddhist council. There are four Buddhist councils. First was in the reign of Ajatashatru. Second was in the reign of Kalashok, who was the Saisunga ruler. And then Ajatashatru was the Haranaka one. Then third happens in the Ashoka's time, and fourth happens in the Kanishka's time. Okay. In Kanishka's time, finally, what is happening? There is a proper like Mahayana Buddhism is getting you can say it is getting more popularity. Okay, so that is why the Gandhara and Mathura are you can find that finally Buddha has taken a humanistic form and a sculpture form. So in both of these areas, you will find that Buddha sculptures are present. Okay, in Gandhara, you will find that the Buddha is little like Buddha that see how I used to learn the differences between Gandhara and Mathura Buddha was that Gandhara Buddha was very sad and Mathura Buddha was very delighted. Okay, in Gandhara Buddha, you will find that Buddha has not shaven. He has mustache also. He has beard. Okay, and he has like big earlobes, and then he has like wavy hair and with a bun tied in the top. Okay, like this. Then he's wearing bindi also like here. Okay, he's little sad. He's not delighted. His body is lean, like he's not eaten. So this is how I used to remember. Okay, just for the remembering that like in Gandhara, the Buddha is not very delighted. He's very weak. He's lean. He does not have like muscles and like that. But in Mathura, you will find that the Buddha is very delighted. Like his body is full, is rounded. Okay, he's wearing like clothes, tight clothes. You can see the linings in the clothes. He's like very smiling. Okay, he's properly shaven. There is no wavy curly hair. So this is how I used to remember the difference, and you can also find your own differences. In Gandhara, you will find that there is a Hellenistic or Greek style that you can see. Like you can see in this Gandhara sculptures, but Mathura is mostly indigenous work. Like it is by the people who are living there, and it has no foreign influence. Okay, so this is a difference a little bit around the sculpture art form that existed during the Kushans period. Okay, and now after Kushans, you will find that the new empire coming into picture, which is the Gupta dynasty. Okay, so now you will find that there is a starting of Gupta dynasty, which is around 320 AD. So this is how you need to remember. 320 BC around came the first great empire, which was the Mauryan Empire. Okay, started by Chandragupta Maurya. And exactly like 320 AD, you will find there's the starting of the Gupta Empire. Okay, which is started by Sri Gupta. Okay, but 320 AD you can say is basically the time when Chandragupta Maurya ascended the throne, who was like the first great emperor of the Gupta dynasty. Okay, so this is where Chandragupta I will take the throne. Okay, and then after Chandragupta I, you will find that his son Samudragupta I, Samudragupta is taking the throne. Okay, he is taking the throne around 330 AD. So now this is AD. Okay, this is not BC. This is AD we are dealing with. And after Samudragupta, you will find his son Chandragupta II, who is taking the throne. In Chandragupta II only, you will find he had something called as Navratna. Okay, in whose court you will find Varamira. Although there was Aryabhat, but Aryabhat was not one of the Navratnas. Okay, he was not the one of the Navratnas. In Chandragupta II's time only, you will find that there is what? There is a medicine. So you remember Charak, Shushrut, and the third one, the trinity that we call, the third medical trinity person is found in his court, and the name you need to tell, because Charak and Sushrut were present in the Kanishka's time. Now you have to tell me the third one who is present in the Chandragupta II's court. Okay, so he had, and then he had Kalidas also. And Kalidas, we already know, he has written many poems also. He has written many plays also. He has written many novels also. For example, Meghdut. For example, Ritu Sambar. Then we have also like Malvika Agnimitra. Okay, so like that, he has written many plays. He has written many poems, etc. So these are all present in the Chandragupta II's time. Okay, Chandragupta II's time, you will find that, there are many scientific discoveries that are taking place. Aryabhatta was there. He was telling that, how eclipse is taking. He has actually calculated the circumference of the earth. He, you can say, was close to calculating the value of pi also. There was Varamira, okay, who wrote about what? Who wrote about the astronomical systems, astrological systems, the geography of the entire area, etc. So generally it is said that Gupta Empire was the zenith or the golden period of India's history. Okay, but many historians are the one who also contest this thing. They say that it is not a golden period of Indian history, because we are only talking about we cannot say that this particular history is the golden period or this particular time, because entire history has not been discovered. So see, whenever such questions appear in the mains examination, never write completely pro or completely con, never write completely plus or completely negative. Also I'll always take a middle stand. So say yes, it was a golden period because there was a lot of scientific discoveries happening. There were so many, you can say, great astrologers, astronomers that were present. There were so many plays, etc., written. The history and literature was at its zenith. Okay, this is a time when you will find the even the epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata also getting written. Okay, but you can also say similarly, but this cannot be the only period of golden history, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this is how you moderate your answers. So after learning some Chandragupta 1, Samudragupta 1 and Chandragupta 2, you will find that after Chandragupta also there was like Kumar Gupta and other rulers. Okay, but dhire dhire Gupta dynasty is actually declining, and Kumar Gupta was the one in whose time Nalanda University was established. Okay, and you will find that this was a time when Chinese pilgrims started coming to India, and this has been the question asked in the mains examination, wherein they asked you to write about the Arabic and Chinese travelers that visited India. So you will find around 405 AD, okay, which is in the reign of basically Kumar Gupta and Chandragupta. You will find that Chinese pilgrim Faiyaan has visited India. Okay, and then after I told you Chandragupta 2, there was Kumar Gupta. After Kumar Gupta, there was Skanda Gupta, who had to face the invasions from the Huns. Okay, and that is why you will find that first Hun war is taking place in the reign of Skanda Gupta. Okay, and finally you will find that there are later Guptas which are very weak, who cannot handle such big empire. There are already foreign invasions happening. There are basically Samantas within the Gupta empire who have become very strong and who are asking for independence, and that is why Gupta dynasty comes to an end. Okay, and I told you in this period only you have Aryabhatta, the astronomer who was born, and then after after Gupta dynasty, we have another empire coming into picture, which was basically the Harshvardhan Empire. Okay, so till Guptas we have covered, and now the last part of the ancient history that we need to study, apart from the southern Indian history, the Sangam Age, etc., in the northern side I'm discussing is basically the Harshvardhan Empire. Okay, so you will find that it is around Thanesar and later Kannauj. Okay, another dynasty is actually taking its form, and whose one ruler that we need to study is basically Harshvardhan or Harsha. Okay, and you can say that Harshvardhan is ruling at the same time, and in the southern India you have Chalukyas. Okay, because you know that Chalukyas, Pulakesin II had a had a battle with Harsha. Okay, and you have lot of, like, if you have an inscription written wherein the battle has been described, and like there have been lines written, like basically both sides. See, there has been no clear victory that who won the war, because in the Pulakesin side it is written that Harsha was no longer Harsha after losing the war, but in Harsha's side, like his court poet, basically he is saying the other thing. But you need to remember that this tells you that Harsha and Chalukyas were basically contemporaries. Okay, so Harsha, his capital was Kannauj, and in his time basically you'll find Hyun Sang coming to India. He visits India, and he has also written extensively about how this Harshvardhan's empire was, and how basically definitely he found that, see, all these Chinese like ambassadors that are coming to India, they're coming, or these Chinese pilgrims who are visiting India, they're visiting India to actually see the great land where Buddhism was born. They want to see where Buddhism is right now, how is the Buddhism state in India. And Hyun Sang clearly mentions that during the Harsha's time, the Buddhism state in North India has declined, and the position has declined. There is a rise of Brahmanism and Hinduism, like he has seen across. And he writes about the conditions of women also, condition of Shudra also, about the administration also, and how like there is a decline in the economy if compared to the Gupta Empire. Okay, and finally you know here that Harsha was defeated by Pulakesin, who was a Chalukya ruler. So it is Pulakesin II. Okay, and this is all happening around 600 AD. Okay, roughly. And Harsha, you must remember that he used to basically, see, Harsha was basically a Hinduist, like a Hinduite, and due to Hyun Sang, first he converted to Hinayan Buddhism, and then he converted to Mahayan Buddhism because of the Hyun Sang who was present, who came to his court. And what Harsha did was to basically convince people, other people also, to join this Mahayan Buddhism, etc. He actually organized assemblies, okay, like Allahabad Assembly, Kannauj Assembly, etc., where he used to call greatest rulers of the world, like existing at that time, all the great poets, all the great rulers and kings and princes, and he basically gave the code to Hyun Sang to explain people what is Mahayan Buddhism, how is it good, etc. And after one of the assemblies, Harsha basically left his empire, and then he went on for Buddhism. Okay, like completely following Buddhism. So this is like a brief history of till Harsha Empire. And now what we'll do is we'll take the Southern Indian history. See what is happening. It's not like Southern Indian history is different from Northern Indian history and it is happening in a different time frame. It is just that if you take both together, you'll get confused as to what is happening. So what we generally do is we describe the Northern Indian history like in a chronology. We start from like prehistory, proto-history, then the Vedic period, then the Magadha Empire. Starting from Haryana, we go to Mauryas, and then Sanghas, and then Kanvas. Then we talk about the foreign invasions. Then we again go back to the Gupta Empire, and then we come back to Harshvardhan. Okay, this is where our Northern Indian chronology is going. And now we will look at the Southern Indian chronology, wherein we will start with the Sangamej, Gotal, Cholas, etc. Pallavas, Cholas, etc. Okay. So now we will start with the Southern Indian Empire.